The question has never left us. Not in stone, not in silence, not in sleep. What does it mean to be human? A flare of light, brief, ancient, alive. Fire flickers on cave walls, a handprint, a breath held in time, a cry not heard in 100,000 years. That question did not begin with philosophers. It began with fear, with hunger, with the cold touch of night against skin, not yet clothed in language. She did not call herself mother. She did not know the name of the stars, but she knew that something was watching, not the sky, not a god, but the future. Long before kings, before metal, before war was called noble, they walked, not as conquerors, but as questions made flesh. They walked not to rule, but to remember something older than even memory itself. They left no scrolls, no speeches, no scripture, just this. A hand, a breath, a touch that says, "I was here." He does not know he is the ancestor of millions. He does not know that he has crossed into legend, but every step he takes shapes a continent. His feet map a future that no king could design, no priest could command. They were not beasts. They were builders, not of towers but of time, not of walls but of wonder. What is the first religion but the need to be seen? What is the first science but the desire to understand? What is humanity if not the urge to remember? Before the pyramids, before the scroll, before Egypt rose from dust and Nile, before Rome, before even the desert came, North Africa was sacred. It held the breath of those who first dared to stay when everything screamed, "Move." It held the fire of those who chose to create instead of collapse. The past didn't vanish. It didn't crumble like empire. It hid, in bones beneath the sand, in symbols no one now can read, in the memory of a storm passed down as myth. She is not priestess, not queen, not conqueror. But in that spiral she teaches something no language can hold. That memory is older than names, that stories are sacred, even when the gods have no faces. This is not the beginning of civilization. This is the beginning of possibility. Before we built cities, we built meaning. Before we crowned kings, we crowned silence. This is not a lesson. This is a resurrection. The past didn't vanish. It hid. In ashes, in letters never sent, in bones buried beneath empires that swore they'd never fall. But now, we unearth them. We listen to the screams beneath the silence. We trace the fingerprints of the forgotten. We stand in the footprints of gods that never needed temples. This is not just history. This is memory awakened. Before we go into that history buried under sand, ash, and silence, stories that were never meant to survive, subscribe to Unique History Alive. Because here, the dead don't just whisper, they scream their truth. On this channel, we don't just tell you what happened. We show you why it mattered, who hid the truth, and what the world lost when history was rewritten. From blood-stained temples to banned scrolls, from warrior queens whose names were burned from memory, to emperors erased by their enemies. We breathe life into the past, one uncovered secret at a time.
Before Egypt rose, before the Sahara turned to sand, North Africa was not a desert. It was a womb. A land green with promise, wet with thunder, breathing with life. A figure walks alone. Her back is straight, her arms free. She is not yet woman as we know her. But she is no longer a beast. Her name will never be spoken. But we have given her many. Australopithecus afarensis. Lucy. Though she carried no music but breath. This, the first idea. Not of survival, but of control. The tool was not an accident. It was thought. And thought changed everything. North Africa became a corridor. Not of conquest, but of becoming. Through Algeria, Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. Early humans moved with the seasons. With the rains. With the memory of water. They hunted gazelle. They cracked bones for marrow. They learned that meat gave more than strength. It gave endurance. Brain power. They watched the sky. And they remembered where the herds would go. Memory itself evolved. This is not mythology. This is mourning in the Pleistocene. This is the first apprenticeship. Fire was more than warmth. It was stage. Confessional. Mirror. They began to speak. Not just with sounds, but with ideas. Here, the first stories were born. And where there are stories, there is hope. Then came death. And with it, something new. Ritual. They did not dispose. They were honored. They buried not to forget, but to hold on. The child beside her, perhaps her own, was not left alone. This was more than a loss. It was memory, shaped by grief. At Gabbero, the desert gave up its dead. A woman buried with her arms around two young children. They had been placed that way, deliberately. With care. And near their hands, blades of hippo ivory. As if to say, you were loved. You are still needed. Where the Sahara now stretches dry and golden. Once stood lakes, forests, cattle and birds, reeds and fish. The green Sahara, a memory the earth can barely hold. But they remembered. And they came to Nabta Playa. Not to conquer, but to observe. What they built was not a city. It was something older than architecture. A question made of stone. A calendar. A celestial map. A mirror for the sky. 6,500 years before Christ. 1,000 years before Stonehenge. They aligned stone pillars with the summer solstice. They tracked Sirius, the dog star. They watched the heavens. And trusted that meaning would descend. We do not know her words. But we know her intent. To mark the time. To mark existence. Art became memory. Memory became religion. And religion, not fear, but awe. Look at what they painted. Not kings. Not war. But dance. Cattle. Women in trance. Their gods were not men of thunder. They were spirits of rhythm. In ancient North Africa, cattle were not possessions. They were kin. They were life givers. They were sacred. The people of the cattle left no walls, but they left belief. And they began to plant. Not just food, but civilization. Every basket held more than grain. It held intention. They stayed. The nomads became villagers. The walkers became watchers. For the first time in this region's history, they did not follow water. They redirected it. They became custodians of place. They did not leave great monuments, but they left this: fire, stone, burial, dance, story, silence. They left the tools for everything we would later call civilization. Before pharaohs, before gods with names, before swords, there was memory, there was reverence, there was earth. Change does not always come with fire. Sometimes it arrives in silence, on the curve of a bone, in the hum of a song, in the hands of a woman weaving baskets from reeds. And then everything shifts. The rains returned for a time, and the land responded with joy. The Sahara bloomed again. Grasslands, rivers, forests of acacia and date palms. And the people responded, too. They did not just live with nature. They began to shape it. This was not an invention in the modern sense. It was observation, patience, ritual. The planting of seeds was a prayer, a pact between human and earth. It was the beginning of agriculture. By 17,000 BCE, the Nile Valley showed signs of planned harvest. Grinding stones, sickles, storage pits. They were not yet farmers, but they were learning the rhythm of the soil. Farming came slowly. It did not erase hunting. It coexisted with it. They trapped fish, gathered fruit, and slowly they stayed. Staying changed everything. They had fire. Now they had form. Pottery was not decoration. It was memory hardened by flame. A jar could outlive its maker and carry her voice forward. The invention of ceramics meant permanence. A vessel to carry food, water, grain, hope. They painted what mattered. Not battles, but bonds. The cattle that gave them milk. The spirits that danced in dreams. The women who chanted at dusk. These were not artists. They were witnesses. They began to preserve not just memory, but the body itself. This was the earliest known mummy in Africa. Not for kings, but for a child. A small body, wrapped in sorrow and ritual. As if to say, you still belong to us. They wandered, but they were not isolated. From Libya to Sudan, Algeria to the Red Sea, they exchanged not only goods, but thoughts. A carved pendant from one people became sacred to another. Trade was not just economic. It was spiritual. In that song, ideas traveled faster than feet ever could. They looked to the stars and remembered their movement. At Nabta Playa, stones were not just lifted. They were aligned to the solstice, to Sirius, to the sacred clock in the sky. This was not architecture. It was astronomy made sacred. 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid, these people were measuring light. Time was not linear. It was circular, a rhythm shared between soil and sun. They began to work with metals. Not iron yet, but copper. Hammered cold from surface veins. It shined. It held the edge. It dazzled the eye. And with it came status. The first glimmers of inequality. They began to speak to gods. Not of the wind or rain, but of justice, time, and judgment. Masks became more than costumes. They became embodiments. And where belief is strong, so is doubt. And doubt breeds opposition. They had no temples, but they had outcasts. They had no courts, but they had consequences. They did not just survive. They thrived. They studied the stars, measured floods, mapped animal migrations, predicted seasons, crafted mythologies, created beauty from bone. What changed them was imagination. And once it awoke, it refused to sleep. To innovate is to remember forward, to imagine what does not yet exist, and make it real. Here, in the soil of forgotten camps and sacred stones, the future was born. They lit the fire. We live in its glow. It begins slowly, with the need to protect. A harvest, a child, a name. The moment humans learn to stay in one place, they also learn to guard it. They had made fire. They had made stories. Now, they would begin to make power. It starts as an agreement. A shared law, spoken, not written. A decision made beneath the sun, with no need for crown or punishment. But time bends decisions into patterns. Patterns into roles. Roles into control. And just like that, authority is born. As the African humid period waned, climate began to unravel the green world they had known. What had been abundance was becoming scarcity. Water no longer arrived on time. Grass retreated. Wild herds vanished. People moved. But some stayed. And those who stayed learned to organize. Time was now not just watched. It was measured. With measurement came prediction. With prediction came reverence. And with reverence came status. He was not a king, but they obeyed him as if he spoke for the sky. The tribe was no longer equal. Roles hardened. Elders became judges. Singers became priests. Hunters became warriors. In death, status lingered. Some were buried with love. Others, with authority. This was no longer community. It was hierarchy. The river had always given freely. But now, it demanded structure. Farming required planning. Planning required leadership. And leadership required loyalty. The Nile had become sacred and political. Its flow governed fate. And whoever commanded its flow commanded life. We do not know the name of the first warlord. Only that he held more than food. He held fear. And fear is a powerful currency. They built to defend. But the wall that keeps enemies out also keeps people in. Power learned to close the circle. Even art began to obey. The gods who once danced now stood above, judging, demanding, receiving. Blood became offering. Sacrifice became law. This is no longer a suggestion. It is a decree. From earthbound elder to sky-spoken prophet, ritual became gatekeeping. Tradition became exclusion. What had once united now divided. With trade came opportunity and danger. Control of trade meant control of wealth. And wealth is power codified. Diplomacy emerged in the form of daughters. Peace paid in flesh. Some were buried as gods, others as laborers. Equality had become myth. With power came record. The first glyphs. The first ledgers. Not of poetry, but of ownership. Who owned what? Who owed whom? Memory became administration. Tradition stood no chance against inheritance and force. Old age was no longer the final word. Now, wealth had the last say. What began as structure grew into struggle. The river could not feed all. The priests could not bless all. The walls could not protect all. Something was brewing. The sky had given them order. Now it gave them warning. They had made power. But now it had a life of its own. The house they built was no longer shelter. It was throne. It was weapon. It was seed of collapse. It does not fall in a single day. Not like a wall collapsing, but like a breath held too long. It begins with the sky. Its silence. The wind no longer carries rain. The rivers no longer promise return. The grass turns brittle. The animals go elsewhere. And those who had shaped the land now feel it turning against them. The African humid period had lasted for millennia. It gave birth to abundance, belief, and culture. But between 5000 and 3000 BCE, it ended. The climate turned. The rains retreated south. The Sahara began its long, slow death. And with it, so did the world they knew. They did not understand why the rain stopped. They only knew the gods were quiet. And so they prayed louder, sacrificed more, feared deeper. But the sky remained empty. The Sahara swallowed history. Villages abandoned. Waterways erased. Cattle trails lost to sand. This was not a war. It was an erasure. At Gabbero, where people once buried their dead in peace, the second group arrived differently. No art. No ceremony. Just survival. They moved. Not with triumph, but with exhaustion. This was not migration. This was flight. From sun. From death. From memory. The Nile had always flowed with life. Now it flowed with tension. There was not enough. Not enough food. Not enough space. Not enough mercy. Where once there was sharing, there was now boundary. Where once there was ceremony, there was now warning. Lines were drawn, not in ink, but in blood. The archaeological record tells what the stories do not. A rise in trauma. A rise in hasty burial. A rise in fear. Their gods, once partners, now strangers. What was once sacred became desperate. The mask no longer comforted. It commanded. The circle is no longer protected. It is confined. Even their art began to fracture. Even their stories began to darken. Even memories began to break. She is not recorded in history, but she is part of it. She is the echo no one listens for. The song too soft for the empire to hear. The earth reclaims what it lent. It gave them green, then took it away. It gave them time, then erased their clocks. Collapse is not always explosion. Sometimes it is crystallization. In times of fear, freedom dies first, then memory, then people. And now, ritual had teeth. Order required blood. Sacrifice no longer symbolic. The system survived, but only because it began to devour its own. Even the heavens betrayed them. They had once mapped eternity. Now even the sky had changed. But even in collapse, they carried forward. They brought their knowledge, their myths, their dead, into the Nile, into the memory of Egypt, into us. It did not fall in fire. It did not fall with a scream. It ended with wind, with sand, with a silence so loud it echoes still. They built a world, then watched it disappear. But even loss leaves shadow. Even absence leaves a shape. And if we listen closely, we can still hear them, whispering through the dust. They did not leave behind temples tall enough to pierce the sky. No cities carved from marble. No epic poems etched into stone. And yet, they left us everything. Not in what they built, but in how they endured. Not in what they ruled, but in what they remembered. Every mark they made was a sentence in a language older than writing. A spiral, not decoration, but meaning. A warning. A prayer. A memory. These were not primitive scratches. They were the earliest verses of what it means to leave something behind that endures. Tassili Enaja holds thousands of these. Paintings layered upon paintings. Time pressing over time, like sediment. They told no lies in stone. They told what they lived. A woman mid-dance. A man with arms raised to the storm. A horned figure walking between worlds. This was not art for art's sake. This was identity. And belief. Their bodies remain. Not as dust. As testimony. At Gabbero, the oldest known cemetery in the Sahara. They buried their dead with care. Bodies arranged. Hands folded. Offerings placed, as if death was not an end, but a journey. And in one grave, a woman embraces two children. Their arms still locked, 6,000 years later. Who they were is lost. But what they felt is eternal. Long before the pyramids rose from limestone, they built something quieter, but just as precise. At Nabta Playa, they arranged stone slabs to trace the sun. This was no idle stacking of rock. This was astronomical knowledge. Spiritual design. A timekeeper for the sky. And with it, they connected heaven and earth. She did not record history. She aligned with it. They did not disappear. They dispersed. Modern DNA confirms it. The early peoples of northern Africa moved outward and inward. They mingled with Nubians, Berbers, Nilotes, Levantines. Some crossed the Red Sea. Some followed rivers into Europe. You can find their trace in the blood of farmers in southern France, in the teeth of a child buried in Israel, in the mitochondrial DNA of Egyptians, in the jawlines of Saharan nomads. They worked with copper. They tamed fire. They stored grain. They mapped the stars. But they did not rush toward empire. They lingered in balance. They understood how to last, without needing to conquer. What they built was not fragile wealth, but lasting knowledge. A pot was not a luxury. It was life extended. Memory fired into permanence. Their tools were simple, but elegant. They left no machines, but their systems still echo. They did not bow to gods of thunder. They bowed to rhythm, to the river's return, to the cow's birth, to the way stars reappeared, always in time. They domesticated cattle, but did not enslave them. The cow was not just meat. It was symbol. Fertility. Stability. Identity. The cow fed them, but also guided them. In their hands, a herd was holy. They organized without tyranny, lived without kings, judged without armies. There were differences, yes, but not domination. Power existed, but it rotated. Burials show this balance. Women with beads, children with tools, elders with memory. They ruled through respect, not fear. And when power began to ossify, the earth corrected them. No culture invents mourning. It is born with us. They knew loss, and instead of hiding it, they honored it. Their grief was slow, ritualized, sacred. Even now, we find their tears hardened in clay. We find graves facing sunsets. We find love outlasting the body. Not all memory survives in bones. Some survives in song. Their stories changed, but never died. They became myth. Then myth became heritage. And even today, in a whisper passed from grandmother to child, they live again. What they left behind is not always something we can touch. Sometimes it is the shape of a question that refuses to fade. A footprint, long since gone, but the path still there. A rhythm we forgot to follow, but still hum in our sleep. They are not relics. They are relatives. We carry their bones in our bones, their fears in our fears, their fire in our ambition. We pray to different gods, but we still kneel to the sky. We use different tools, but we still search the stars. We grieve the same. We hope the same. And when we forget who we are, they are still there, reminding us. They built no towers, but they built time. They built rhythm. They built us. This is their legacy. Not a crown, not a city, but a question. Will we remember them? Or will we become them? They did not know us, but we are made of them. Not their names, we do not know those. Not their cities, they built few, but we carry their echo in every rhythm of our bodies. They left no crown, but they left time. They left questions. And now, as we stare into our future, we walk upon their bones. The land does not forget. It simply buries every drought line, every dry lake bed, every cracked seed bed is a memory. We build on top of it, pave over it, measure it with GPS, but it watches us, and beneath each footstep, it whispers, I was here before you. He does not look up, but he is not alone. His blood knows the shape of this valley. His hands mimic the same gestures. He sings a different language, but the melody is old. We teach them that history begins with writing, with kings, with war. But what if it began in silence? In gesture? In memory? Before walls were built, there were circles. Before alphabets, there were spirals. And before cities rose, humanity learned to stay. They call it prehistory, as if to say, what came before doesn't count. But she feels it, that something is missing, that what they left behind deserves more than silence. Science moves slowly, but memory is patient. For decades, these lands were ignored. labeled blank, forgotten, dismissed. But they were never empty. They were full of breath. And now, she holds proof. The child was 7. This is their monument. Not stone, not gold, but recognition that someone else, long ago, reached toward the future and touched you. We build again, taller, faster, heavier. But do we listen to what lies beneath? The bones of mothers, the laughter of children, the spiral carved into the desert floor. These are not barriers to progress. They are foundation. She remembers. And so they do too. They live in our voices, our movements, our genes, our art, our questions. They live in the way we wait for rain, in the way we bury our dead, in the way we still fear the silence. We are not their legacy. We are their continuation. They lived. They remembered. They grieved. They wondered. And then they became us.